Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy DeYoung, and welcome to another edition of Prophecy Moment. We are so thrilled for the opportunity that we have at this time in history to be able to teach Bible prophecy. This time, I want to talk about one of the most exciting headlines that I've heard in a long time. It's that there was a historic drop in oil prices. 305% drop in oil prices. As I saw the number, they told me that oil was selling not for $100 a barrel, $80 a barrel, but a minus $37 a barrel. You know what that means? I do believe that it probably means you drive into a service station, fill your tank up with gasoline, and then all of a sudden the owner of the service station comes out, hands you a $20 bill, says, "Thank you very much for buying our gas here at our service station. They're paying us to buy gas and fill up our automobiles." Well, I've seen prices all across the spectrum. 99 cents the other day. I saw one service station had available regular gas. I haven't seen 99-cent gasoline a gallon, and I cannot remember when. It used to be, and I can remember when I first started driving, about 25 cents a gallon. I've seen it as high as $6 a gallon. But because of this historic drop in oil prices, things have really changed. I have a friend who is now in the heavenlies, Dr. John Walford. Dr. John and I traveled and we spoke together in different prophecy conferences across the United States. I would have to say that John Walford may well have been, in my lifetime, the greatest prophecy scholar that I've had the opportunity to know. Wrote a number of books, and one back in 1974 that he wrote was entitled Armageddon, Oil, and the Middle East Crisis. You know, the theme of the book was talking about Armageddon, which is the future when Jesus Christ comes back, the Middle East crisis, which has been going on for a number of years, but he mentioned oil in that equation in the title of his book. In 1974, you might remember that was the year following in 73 when they had the big concern about gasoline and the lines were so long everybody was in line to purchase and fill up their automobiles with gasoline. But he recognized the significance of oil in the Middle East. Now, from an economic perspective, there is an importance for oil in the Middle East. Number one, out of the Middle East, out of these Arab nations, comes that fuel which helps us to drive our automobiles, fly our airplanes, and run the engines that we need in industry to make the items that we need to sustain life. So that comes out of the Arab countries there in the Middle East. And in addition to that, those Arab countries have the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, where they can load up these ships, these oil tankers, and bring that oil to all the waterways of the world, ultimately getting them to the locations they need to deliver that oil. Let me tell you what else is so key about oil in the Middle East. The nations, the Arab nations in particular, have become very wealthy. They came out of poverty. They came into life, and of course they've expanded much farther than anybody ever thought they would. I can remember reading about Mark Twain going to the Middle East in the late 30s. When he got back, he wrote a book and he said, "I don't see how anybody can sustain life in that part of the world. It's totally devastated. There's no way anybody can exist in the Middle East." Well, he was talking about Israel somewhat in particular, but also the Arab nations as well. But let me tell you what that wealth for the Arab nations has been able to do. It's been able to prepare them for a prophetic scenario that's found in the Word of God. And that prophetic scenario is talking about an alignment of Arab nations and Islamic nations as well, who will come together and endeavor to try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, that her name be forgotten forever. That is key into understanding the oil wealth that has given the capability for these Arab and Islamic nations to be able to do that which the Lord, through the ancient Jewish prophets, wrote would happen. pre-wrote history, basically, and they did it in a number of passages. Now, I don't have time to go to all the prophetic passages. Let me suggest 3 passages if I can. Number 1, Ezekiel chapter 38. Number 2, Daniel chapter 11. And number 3, Psalm 83. Jot those down, Ezekiel 38, Daniel chapter 11, and Psalm 83. Those are key in understanding the significance of this historic drop in oil prices and why that may encourage these Arab and Islamic nations to move sooner rather than later to follow what God said they would do, endeavor to try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Let me just think with you about those 3 passages just for a moment. Number 1, in Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 2, it talks about Magog. Magog, when you go back to Genesis chapter 10, was a grandson of Noah, son of Japheth, and he went to establish a nation, it says there in the book of Genesis chapter 10, verse 5, to establish a nation north of the Caspian and Black Sea. We know that geographical location is modern-day Russia. Over in the book of Psalm, chapter 83 and verse 6, it talks about the Ishmaelites. Who would be the Ishmaelites? Well, you might remember reading in the book of Genesis, chapter 16, about Ishmael being born to Abraham and the handmaiden of his wife Sarah. And she would give birth to Ishmael. In the 17th chapter of the book of Genesis, in verse 20, the Lord, in a meeting with Abraham, said that son, Ishmael, would establish one nation, not the Arab world. Ishmael did not establish the Arab world. It says in Genesis chapter 25 in verses 18 and following, and there it describes the geographical location where Ishmael would go and establish a nation. You study that passage, the book of Genesis, chapter 25, verses 18 and following, and you'll find out it's talking about, at that time it was called Arabia. Today it's called Saudi Arabia. Do you see what's going on here? Do you realize why this price of oil has dropped so drastically in recent days? Well, OPEC, who controls the flow of oil, the price of oil, had a bit of a problem when Russia, who is a major producer of oil, and Saudi Arabia, the second producer in the world. But what's been going on, Russia, from Ezekiel 38 and verse 2, and Saudi Arabia, from the book of Psalm, chapter 83 and verse 6, Saudi Arabia, Russia, trying to flood the market with oil and drive the price down. That is so much a part of this scenario in oil prices today. But what's Russia's desire, and why are they doing this type of thing? Well, they would ultimately like to get rid of the United States because according to Ezekiel 38, Russia is going to be the leader of these Arab Islamic oil-rich nations who will form a coalition, align themselves against the Jewish state of Israel. A key player in that's going to be Syria. That's Daniel chapter 11, verse 40, and it's talking about the king of the north there. That's modern-day Syria. When you look at Syria today, you have Syria at Israel's northern border. You have Russia there. You have the Iranian Revolutionary Guard at that location. You have Hezbollah out of Lebanon. All of these are players in that end-time alignment to try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. And so if Russia and Saudi Arabia can flood the market, drive the oil price down, that's going to cause maybe, now just think maybe, going to cause these Arab nations to move quicker, to take the monies they have, their wealth, before they lose it all. Because I've talked to economic advisors, and they say the possibility of many of these oil companies, these Arab Islamic oil companies in the Middle East, could go bankrupt. So they need these monies in order to be able to have that armament, the munitions, the manpower, the military force to try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. You see how the Lord uses world events to set things in place? A historic drop in oil prices, possibly setting the stage for Bible prophecy. Now, whether the oil causes this to come sooner rather than later, I cannot make that absolute statement. I can make an absolute statement that these nations will align themselves and try to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That is absolute, according to Word of God. And just prior to this alignment coming together to do exactly what the Bible in Bible prophecy tells us these nations will do, just prior to that, the rapture of the church will take place. Every time we get together, I want to remind you about the rapture, which can happen at any moment. And having said that, basically nothing else for me to say except let's keep looking up until